Season 1, episode 3 of Talk Me Through Your Process podcast, a leadership podcast. And we made it to episode 3, so that's kind of cool. And we titled this one, it's called Syllabus. It was Chris Cluff that did that. We have a special guest today. Normally, it's just myself, Ramona, and Chris. But today we have Jen Apgar. What's so funny, Cluff?
Normally, we're on episode 3.
I know, but it's like
episode 3. Normally, if you tuned in last year, this podcast wasn't here. But normally...
But I have to... Okay, so for me, this is old hat because, well, I podcast with you, Chris, and Ramona is just one of us, unfortunately, whether she likes that or not, even though we've never podcasted together. So it feels like with Jen being here, it's like a special episode because we have a guest, but
True.
It just feels normal for the three of us to kind of banter back and forth. Anyway, okay. Mm-hmm. So Jen, welcome to the podcast. We would love to hear a little bit about, tell us about who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. So I work in the Upper Grand District School Board, which is the Guelph. We have a board office in Guelph and a board office in Orangeville. So we actually border a lot of district school boards, including, I think, yours, Rolland. So I'm a primary, junior. I guess now I'm intermediate qualified because you have to be all 3 panels to do your PQP 1 and 2. I primarily worked when I was in the classroom doing junior congregated gifted class. And I just am that's changed. I was about to start my 7th year as a technology coach for our district. But I've been recently made a temporary VP of our elementary remote school, effective sort of last week and definitely this week. That's the short blurb on me. I mean, I'm sure all my other quirks and all that will come out as we chat.
Right on. Thanks for that. Chris, do you want to jump in and tell us about the topic, the meaty part of the topic for this episode?
Sure. I was completely self-serving in thinking of this topic. I can admit that because I just finished up PQP1 this summer. So still hot on my brain as far as the lessons we went through, the speakers we got to connect with, how the lesson plans kind of looked. So thinking that there's a high likelihood that there will be individuals that are looking to take PQP1, maybe PQP2 in September. So the principal qualification program or course, individuals that are thinking about taking that might be interested in hearing what some of the coursework looks like, to be honest. That's why I kind of came at it. And then I will tell you, there was some Twitter feeds today. I think, Jen, you were playing in that space, talking about the expediency of learning, sort of compacting learning into a very tight space. And you, I think, had sort of kind of lit up the idea about the accelerated learning. And I think that was kind of connected to a conversation that Chids had. Someone was talking about summer school. So all these kind of things kind of mashed up to bring Syllabus to life. So that's as good as I got.
It was Jim Pedrich that made a comment about high school teachers. If you have to accelerate, how do you deal with how do you make it interesting, or how do you just do it? And then right away it brought back bad memories of high school, summer school, and recalling how when I would go, you could take 2 courses, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And it was, I liken it to running a marathon at the speed of 100-meter dash. That's what it felt like to me. It felt like I had to go 24K or whatever, but I was running full blast the whole time to get to the end. And so then when Jen was talking about that on Twitter this morning, I was like, oh my God, we're going to talk about the PQP in a condensed form. Now, before I stop talking, I'm going to say that when I found out Cluff was taking PQP Part 1 this summer, so he's telling me I'm taking it this summer, I'm like, right on. And then as we were getting closer to the start of his PQP, I remember saying to him, dude, are you ready for about what's going to happen? Because you're going to be on for like 3 weeks. He's like, yeah, he's all pumped or whatever. After the first week, I remember talking to him and he looked weak and he looked tired. And he's like, that hit me hard. Like I'm going to get through it. It's not a matter of getting through it. It's a matter of there's a lot to do. It's like there's just so much every day that has to happen to get me to the end. So I guess on that note, Jen, what were you thinking when you tweeted that out? Like, what parts of that do you really want to dig into about AQs or PQP or whatever?
Well, and it was interesting because when after your first episode and Chris reached out and we sort of chatted about it, and I think of things that were sort of true of me in my process in taking it, which also so is it okay if I unpack a little bit of a story that's for the okay? So so the other AQs that I've done before PQP, I've done entirely. I've always done online. So through Queens, EDFO, and New York have been all my additional qualifications. And none of them were truncated in the summer until I decided to do intermediate math in order to do PQP. And so I did that in the summer. It was the first and only summer and most truncated one. So the other ones, like special education and all my IITC, were while I was teaching in the classroom, but they weren't condensed to what PQP is. And I remember saying, and I picked intermediate math as a challenge because I was working as a technology coach. Math wouldn't be where I said my strength was, but obviously there's a lot of, in a program role, a lot of focus on math. So I said, this is good. I'm going to give myself that challenge. So part of it was possibly the topic or the content curriculum area, but it wrecked my summer. Like I didn't like it. My wife's like, you never worked this hard in a course ever in your life. I'm like, I don't know if it's because it's fast paced. Like I have I'm a fast talker. My brain goes pretty fast, but I don't process I want things to marinate. And so having talked to other people who've done PQP in the summer live, so I didn't do mine in the summer. I did it fully live. And again, we're in a different context right now. But talking to people who did it in the summer and then having done it myself, so I did do them back to back. I started in September. So we did Wednesday nights for 4 hours, Saturday all day, every other week. And then the work, so you had the time in between to be doing the work. And I remember after I finished part 1, and when we get into the syllabus content, I'll unpack that a bit more. But I said, I don't know how anyone does this in the summer. Like, and then knowing some people who did part 2 this time too, like the volume of work, I'm like we did that in 4 months. You folks did that in like 3, however many weeks it was, not in a summer after a pandemic. So kudos. Okay, 4, but so kudos to all of you because that part. And I realized for my PQP, for my journey, I needed it to be face-to-face. I needed a face-to-face cohort. Like Rolland and I said at the beginning when we were chatting before, I've never met Rolland in person. It's nice to be talking live at the same time. Chris and I we tried to hook up one time in person and that didn't happen. Ramona, I think, hasn't been very many times either. So, but I feel like we're a close PLN. I could work with you collaboratively. We could present together and so on. But for me, PQP, I needed time in a room with people, again, which is hard to do right now. And I needed more time to marinate. So I guess for the type of learning I needed to do to decide what I wanted to do with my journey. If I was just ticking boxes to get a paper, and I also decided that I was, I think it was always true of me, but when I would do AQs, sometimes it was to go up to the next pay grid, right? But I was always doing it for what I was teaching and because of what I was interested in. And I said, I'm not going to pay money or spend time just to tick boxes. I want to learn, and if I want to learn, then I need the time. And I found that to be true, which is the other reason. Sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing, but I'll just end with this piece. Is that I remember at the end of PQP Part 1 that I said I loved my leader or facilitator. She was tremendous. I loved the cohort. and I love doing it face-to-face. And I said, all of those things would be exactly true for me to even do PQP Part 2. I said, otherwise I'm not doing it. And that happened to be true right away. So then I thought, well, it might never be true again. So I better do it right away. And I did. But that was to, again, 2017. So I've sat on it, and I'll tell you the rest of the journey later. But anyway, so kudos to you folks. For the processing I needed, it wouldn't have met my needs. I probably would have completed it, but I wouldn't have had the time in between to do the learning I need to do. That's me.
Yeah.
Well, when you put it that way, it makes perfect sense. I get it now. Like, it makes more sense because there's context there. I'm going to let Ramona jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like Chris, I took PQP 2 this summer. So I had the condensed online version and fully online, which they don't usually do, but because of the situation we're in, that's the way it was rolling. I took Part 1 a long time ago. So I've been sitting on it over Part 1 a long time. So 2008, I think. And it was partial online. So we did, it was a full weekend, all day Saturday, all day Sunday at York. I think it was in the spring session. So I think we did 2 of those weekends each month to do that. And then the rest was all online. But it was very different this time around. And I know what you're saying about you need that live component, because I think the condensed version, not condensed, it's just it's happening fast. There's not a lot of processing time, and there's not a lot of time to build that trust, because there's some pretty deep conversations that you're going to be having as part of this. And so you're having them like day two, you've met these people like through a 30-second video and one online meeting where you talked about the textbook, and boom, you're into these conversations that are, where you need to be vulnerable in. And I did find that difficult, as well as the amount of work you have to complete in a amount of time. And I give a lot of people kudos to them, because I don't have kids at home right now. So for me, my husband was pretty understanding when I said, okay, I'll see you in August. But most people can't do that.
When I took PQP Part 1, I was younger and full of vigor, and I wanted so badly to take the course. So right after I got my 5th year under my belt, I registered for it. So I was in my 5th year, and I signed up to do it in the summer, and my SO signed off on the paperwork saying, yeah, by the end of June, he'll have 5 years. But then my son was born prematurely. So I called and I was like, I can't come. Like, I just had a newborn and it's not working out nicely. So they're like, okay, well, we'll defer you to the fall. How's that? I said, that's great. And I signed up for this course with no friends or anything like that. Like, I'm doing this. And it was, I'm a Catholic school teacher, so I preferred to take it through CPCO, but it wasn't being offered close by. So I did it with OPC. And then, and it was just like 30 minutes away in Cambridge. So I get there in the fall, and there are 2 people from my school board who are there that I'm familiar with. So we kind of connected, and it was a lot of fun because I was young, full of vigor, and I had nothing to lose because I was surrounded by teachers that worked in the public board. So there was no connection back to me in the Catholic system. I could say what I wanted, and they just look at me like, well, we don't know who you are, so we don't care. And it was really cool. And we would meet on the weekends, and it was intense. I wasn't getting much sleep because I had a newborn, and I was young and didn't know anything, but I was there to learn. And then I finished that, and there were some bumps in the road with my administrator and my practicum, but I sat on Part 1 for 10 years. And then in 2016, I was working at a school where one of the teachers there was signed up to take Part 2. And he's like, you got to come, because the guy running it is your former principal, and everybody loves him. He's a great guy. And there's a whack of us that that are going to be in it. So it was one of those opportunities where I said to my wife, it's never a good time. Because then I got 2 kids, right? And I was like, it's never going to be a good time, but Rod's running it. in Kitchener, so it's even closer to home, and I trust him, and I can be vulnerable around him like at any time. And there's a whack of people in the course that I've known for years through the system. This is going to be like the ultimate learning experience for me. And my wife was like, "Go for it." So I did it, and it was awesome because of the context. Like, there were people in the room that I know from Twitter that work in my board that I've worked with at different schools, and it was like coming home. It was like sitting in a room with people that you could take risks with an instructor that had your back because he knew me and understood my life situation, and it was fun. So that was my experience. I was telling Cluff the other day that my favorite part of part 2 was where we had to run like a 2-hour session around a topic. And I was looking at the topics, and they were all the typical topics, right? Like IEP, safety, health and safety, unions and understanding collective agreements and stuff. And I said to my instructor, I'm like, I can't do any of these. He's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, look over there." And he turns over, and there's like, everybody's fighting. They're like grabbing each other off the table so they can sign their name for the one that they want. And I said, "Rod, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not going to go and body check Ian so I could get health and safety or whatever." He's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do something about being a digital leader." I'm like, all this stuff's happening, Twitter, websites, blogs, podcasts, videos. I'm like, I think school admin need to learn how to leverage this stuff to build up their school community, to share with people, to connect with people. And he's like, "Go for it." I'm like, "What do you mean go for it?" He's like, "Do it. It sounds awesome. Check in with me just to kind of make sure we're getting what we need to get to make this robust for everybody in the room. And you're going to scare the crap out of everybody in here. So go for it. They're going to learn." I was like, right on. So that was wicked. Cluff, you're up, man. We'd love to hear about your recent experience.
So, well, I'll go just beside that for a second. If there's anyone that comes across this podcast and they are super curious about what a full online Zoom, Google Meet, PQP1 accelerated course looks like, DM me, like connect direct, because if there's questions that are popping up, better for me, I'll just share directly with you. To you three, the thing that kept on sort of kind of bouncing around in my head was the course that I signed up for. When I signed up, OPC had already decided that it was going to be a fully online course. So that decision was sort of made. It wasn't possibly it was going to be partial face-to-face. So they decided that they were going to do a online accelerated. What kind of surprised me a little bit is that the course seemed to be the exact course that would be in non-COVID times. Now, let me shape that a little bit. I get that there's core elements to the syllabus. I get, as you mentioned, Chids, you're talking about IEP equity. You're talking about conversations about FNMI. You're sort of going. There's a ton of mandatory, or let's say compulsory components. What kind of surprised me though is that we didn't speak directly about impact of those. We didn't lens the compulsory components with the current state of affairs. And it kind of surprised me. So I'm getting to the question I want to put to you. So because I kind of became focused on that, I constantly was kind of dropping in stuff about that. My buts were all about, but leadership in the time of COVID, leadership in the time, like I kept on trying to bring that in there. And there wasn't the space in the curriculum to include that. So here's the sort of really long-winded question to you. Individuals that are taking PQP courses, let's say right now, and let's say even into September, is there any element of taking let's say the fully digital version of PQP that you think might impact or impair your ability to lead?
I got distracted. Can you rephrase, because of another tangent that I wanted to go on, but can you say the last part again?
So Is there anything about sort of, my assumption is that the online accelerated, or at least the online version, fully online, is going to continue on. I think that's going to be probably, in order to set up the infrastructure and the consistency, they're going to have to commit, because to flip flop between the two, I don't know if that's reasonable. So my expectation is that the digital version is going to continue, fully digital. My question to you, and because there's quite a wide spectrum of when you folks took qualifications and you're going to action the qualifications, is there any element of doing a fully online PQP that could like what do you feel is the impact of a fully online versus having, you know, a hybrid? And is there any impairment that could come along with that? And this isn't me suggesting that everyone should wait for the, you know, in-person version, but just kind of unpacking it. Like, let's talk about directly here. What is it? What could be impaired about your leadership understanding or your leadership philosophy by only doing a digital version of the course?
I'm happy to go first. So I'm trying to do wait time just because I'm excited. I want to, I guess a lot of things that I'm thinking is that I'm thinking around pedagogy and online pedagogy. And again, now I'm going to step into the admin waters, supporting people who are teaching entirely online. I think there's a couple of factors to unpack. First is that when OPC moved entirely online, from my understanding, it wasn't like the leaders were used to, like, had done it or signed up to do it entirely online initially too. So I think their ability to shift or pivot pedagogy while trying to figure that out might have been difficult for some. Because even to Chid's point, is like when you know the principal, you're like, I think I want to do this. So you're brave enough to say, I think I want to do this. That person's like, yeah, that's cool. We can make that work within the OPC structure, whatever or you're doing. That's the responsiveness of that leader. So I think, to your question, Chris, how might that impact the person taking the course? I think for me, and it's hard to know because of the time in which I did it, because I needed that face-to-face in a social, I wouldn't have ever taken it. Maybe I would have. Sorry, where I am in my journey wouldn't have happened because I had a friend who said, let's do it. Like, I'm not interested in being a principal. She's like, it'll be fun. It's good PD. But again, it was by a principal that I know that it works in my system. I had like 5 other people that I worked with in system roles in my PQP for both cohorts back to back. Like, I barely had to drive anywhere. Like, again, I was very spoiled in that piece, and I wouldn't have had that online. Now, having done all my other AQs online, the intimacy and the vulnerability, I feel like I'm at a stage in my life where I would encourage and ask that, but not everybody is. So to your point, Chris, I guess it depends on who the instructor is, their comfort and ability to navigate an online space that way, which we know everybody's, even people who are very strong at that, people have also come out of the context of being in a, well, no, we're not even out of a pandemic yet. So I think those things play into it. I think of your overall leadership, I mean, had I done it just now, and now moving into being a VP who's going to be working with 132 staff that I will never see in a building, that, right? If I had experienced that more recently, then maybe that would help me in some ways, because I would have had, or I would be missing the rich, intimate conversations that I had, or the sidebars when we'd walk to Timmy's that don't happen in that online. I don't know. I spun around with that, but Ramona, you want to go? You got some ideas? Because you just did part 2 online right now, right?
Yeah, I guess part of what I was thinking about was that quite often when PQP runs, at least in our area, the board runs it, right? It's run by our board. It's a principal in our board. It's held in a board building, one of our schools. It's all board people in it. So had I gone live, I feel like I would not have had the opportunity to work with people from all over Ontario that this offered me, because we couldn't physically get to a same space. Whereas when we were online, we had somebody from up in Northwest Territories. No, it wasn't Northwest Territories. It was really Northern Ontario, though. I'm trying to remember the name of the town. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But we had someone from the far north, from Ottawa. We had someone from Windsor. We had some from, like, really all over. And I found that to be a huge benefit for me, I think, in my future leadership, to not to not have it taught specifically to my board, that it was the board, not just the board vision, not just the people I'm used to seeing at PD, not just the people I may possibly be working with in the future, but that there is so much more out there. There are so many other different ways to do these things. There's so many more options. And I think I guess I'm taking a pivot on Chris's question, because for me, I think that was a huge benefit of doing it fully online. And I was trying to I'm struggling with what in my leadership ability would be impaired, but then it wasn't part one for me. So I had part one where I did have the opportunity to work face-to-face with people, and I've had the opportunity to do fully online. So maybe if it was part one, I may feel differently. I don't know. Rolland, I want to throw it to you.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, Chris. And it's been really cool to hear Jen talk about it and Ramona talk about it. I guess my perspective is I like what Ramona said about having a variety of people from all over the place be part of that experience. So that to me is rich. And I know all the AQs that I've done online, it's always been really awesome to connect with people all over the province. That's been really amazing. And to hear people who are farther north talk about their struggles with whatever the topic is that we're discussing. It always seems that they have a lot of struggles up there because of the situation that they're in. But I was also thinking that when I did 1 and 2 face-to-face, when I did 2 face-to-face, there was a richness that I would not have received from online. So part 2, I was obviously more experienced educator, been around the block a couple of times, connected. There's nothing better than being in a room and somebody says, Rolland, I know about you. And I'm like, well, I know about you too. Let's sit down and talk. What have you heard? What are you up to these days or whatever? For me, the power was in when we had lunches, dinners, or breaks where I would literally find someone to go talk to and then have this like relatively intimate conversation or discussion about a particular topic or about a particular situation in our school board that it would have never happened had I not been taking it face to face with people in my board, having it being run by a principal in my board. So I would have lost a lot of networking type experience if I didn't do it face to face locally, because I would have been with a bunch of people that I probably never meet before ever. And there's no advantage there for me within my system. But having said that, if, for whatever reason, I really wanted to get the qualification and I could do it online and I could say to my family, hey, Dad's going to be in the computer room. If there's an issue, message me. I'll mute and go help or whatever. That's huge when you have a family, in my opinion, right? That I could literally, and I'd love to hear from you, Chris, about that. You're home and I know you're working, you got stuff to do, but if it hits the fan, you're not getting in your car and driving home. Because I had to do that one night at PQP part 2. My wife messaged me. She's like, the little one's really not good. If you can come home, that'd be great. And because I had a relationship with the instructor, I'm like, listen, this is my situation. He's like, go. He wouldn't even let me finish. He's like, if they need you, you got to go. You got to go. So, man, I'm torn. I think I could have done part 1 totally online. I think because I was young and I had nothing to offer. I was just like a sponge and I wanted it to sink in and I needed to get that check mark. Part 2, I tell you, I was friggin' excited on those Thursday nights and those weekends that I had to go in. I was excited, and my family knew it. They're like, you're going to your course this weekend? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, you're happy you're leaving us? I'm like, I'm not happy I'm leaving you, but I'm really happy about what I'm about to enter into for the next few hours on this day. So it depends on context. I'm not opposed to it though. Like if somebody said to me, you got to do it online, sign me up. If I got to do it online to get the qualification, then I'm doing it online. If they told me it's only face to face and it wouldn't work, then I wouldn't take it. So online 100%, face to face for me total context. It had to be the perfect storm, and it was when I did part 2.
So I'm sitting in PQP1. We basically came, all of us, we came right out of teaching in the semester. So there was about maybe 3 days off. I forget, 3 or 4 days off, and then right into the course. And very quickly, as I'm sort of watching the course flow, so all of us have had some measure of trying to figure out what the quick flip to digital learning looks like. And all of our experiences are it's kaleidoscopic. I'm sure all 4 of us will speak to, the elements that worked well, the way we differentiate our communication, like all the different strands of digital learning. Everyone would have a slightly different kind of flavor that they would put in, and they would probably also have a different flavor of success, a different flavor of what didn't work so great, and be able to justify how they're going to shift next, and also maybe look back on what their process was for figuring out how to do digital learning. Now, for me, it was just, what's my quickest way? What's my quickest, most efficient way to keep doing exactly what I was doing in the classroom, at least the sentiment and intention, but digitally. So that was kind of like my approach. Very vague, very wide, and I just kind of dove at it. So I'm sitting in PQP1, and as I mentioned, as I took the course and I wondered about, the why behind having an accelerated course, the other thing that struck me was also, whether they offer an online, a hybrid, or fully, a fully face-to-face version, I wonder about the process of purposeful design. So can throw this back to you folks. I will say that just sideboard, Barge, you asked, like, I was living in my privilege. My kids are old enough to self-reg, do their schoolwork, do digital, go out in the backyard and play. My spouse is an educator. She as well had her own digital space to work in, like I did. We could walk downstairs, we could check in with our kids, we could get back to work. So the course was a lot like that, because I would do some coursework, I'd go check in with my kids. So very privileged, very fortunate to be able to learn that way. It wasn't rough at all to commit the time, which allowed me to kind of dream and think about the course, right? If I didn't have the struggles of thinking I'm going to be pulled away from it, so I had the extra time for my brain to think of like the what ifs behind the course. And I really wondered around what was the purpose behind offering an accelerated course. It was kind of lit up even more, and I couldn't let go of this idea, because a couple of the individuals, there was constant conversation in there about not the skills we were developing, but kind of what was the necessary tools we should have as takeaways from this course. Like that, those conversations started right away. And there were some individuals in the course that said what they would really appreciate is if the course had to have the course longer, not have the accelerated part of it, and then have some parts where you would kind of have a homeroom kind of a setup, and then your cohorts would then be mixed. So you could work with individuals that are actually in your district. And that really became fascinating to me, because there was this constant conversation around, okay, this is cool, this is great. I understand a little bit more about everyone bringing different skill sets into the conversation. I'm high school context, spec ed, some behavioral, working in autism. Like everyone had they're bringing in their lens and looking at the PQP curriculum through that. So it was cool to kind of say, oh, okay, we're doing the same curriculum and you're teaching, you're elementary homeroom teacher, or right now, oh, you're a library consultant. Like everyone came in different access points, but everyone kind of rallied around the idea of they wish they had the opportunity. And this was, there was lots of different jurisdictions in there, but everyone kind of landed on that same point, that they wish that they could do work with individuals in their own district. Because the constant reinforcement is that when you eventually do take the chair, someone actually said, you got to know who you have on speed dial, which I thought was kind of a dated term, but it kind of meant who's on your short list to call if you need support. And it isn't likely you're going to be calling 5 school boards over, even if you had a great experience learning together. You might, but I'm thinking you're probably calling someone that is in your school board that maybe had kind of co-learned with you or was sort of like in that same range. Maybe you know, there's some affinity that connects you. So that was, as I was learning, that was what was kind of rattling around in my head. Was there any sort of waste? What was the purpose in making the accelerated? Because if I fall on the dark side, I'd fall on, we have to offer it, we have to get it done. Nobody wants to do a course for the whole summer. Like I kind of go the bureaucratic expediency. If I put it more on the learning side, it feels like it was a wasted opportunity. It feels like there was something, it wasn't a thoughtful design to an online course, and it didn't really maximize the opportunity of being connected and staying connected after the course, which really strikes me as, Chids, you and I have had this conversation a lot around authentic relationship building within digital spaces and hanging on to them and making them real. So you don't start real and then flip to digital. Hey, are you on Facebook? You're actually starting on Facebook or Twitter, and then eventually maybe circling around to, hey, you want to go for a coffee? I feel like that was kind of missed out on. And again, COVID times, I get it. But I think that I think there was a cost. That was my perception of the cost to the accelerated course, that there was it was truncated from something that would have been easily accessible on the back end.
I guess, and I wonder this too, and I think back, so I did it, I think 2016 winter, 2017 spring, and I'm not one of those people when you get a survey about something that I like give it feedback, but I really didn't enjoy the syllabus of PQP Part 1. And PQP Part 2, I liked it better, but again, I thought they were both super dated. Like there was even in the PQP Part 2, there was Donald Trump from The Apprentice saying you're fired in one of the slides. And I'm like, I find this offensive. I don't know why this is it. Like, and I wrote them that. I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to them. So when they were doing feedback to rewrite it, I answered all of those things very, very honestly. And I said, my instructor was great. I learned things. You lose credibility. Roland, I don't know if the timelines were similar for you, but the technology piece in one, when I did it, was way dated. And so I've been working as a tech coach for 5 years. I'm like, this is not digital leadership. Like, why did you even pick this book? And I had a relationship again with the principal to say, and she was teaching it for the first time. We were her first cohort for 1 and 2. She was tremendous, but she also knew that's how I rolled. So I'm not going to disengage, but I'm going to give lots of pushback. So my wondering, Cluff, is that and I would go two parts of that wondering is that when they redesigned it, because I had a friend who did summer face-to-face, but there was even the online shell was better than the crummy online shell that I had used. And she was saying, oh, it's different than yours. Cause we were sharing some work, right? It's like, okay, like here's what I did my year. If it's helpful to you, right? Educators do that, my thinking on that. And so I wonder if it wasn't ready. And then when it went into COVID mode, I also wonder if there's a shortage of principals, like a shortage of teachers. So if there's also a shortage of principals, it's like, we need people to get this done so they can do Part 2 because so we have more people qualified. So I don't know, again, provincially. So those are my two wonderings. And then again, with those same people who are strong administrators, like the person that I had, we were all face-to-face, but she was definitely a leader in technology, ability to even, if she didn't teach in an online space, but her ability to use and navigate technology in a meaningful way, having been a principal for a while, was also there, which also maybe isn't always historically true of people who are good at, who teach the course, because they won't have been in the classroom to have been part of the digital learning space, to then even understand digital pedagogy, particularly, again, my context is elementary. So those are my wonderings. I don't know how other people feel.
I think, like, when you talk about like the curriculum, when I think back to my PQP Part 1 in 2006, I don't remember like any major digital components. I mean, we had to type out our reflections and stuff like that and use, we could use PowerPoint to create our presentations. But it didn't seem like there was a heavy emphasis. And our instructor, he was great, but you could tell that it was not his thing. He was almost on the way out in terms of his career. And so I felt like I got a really good old school type learning experience from that instructor. And I don't It was totally great. It was awesome. In 2016, and Cluff and I had this conversation before he started PQP Part 1 this summer. 2016, with CPCO, they had laid out these digital type activities. Like every 2 weeks, you had to do Twitter, and then you had to do this, and then you had to do that. And it was like, I remember my instructor, when he told me, he's like, oh, there's a digital component, Rolland, you're going to love it. And I was like, tell me. And he laughed. And I said, what's so funny? And he said, well, you've done everything already. Like, there's not going to be any digital activity I give you that's part of this curriculum that's going to give you a hard time. In fact, I'm kind of depending on you to assist everybody else when they freak out. Like, what do you mean I need to do a tweet or whatever? Or what do you mean I should start a blog? Stuff like that. But even so, I did that, and it was just whatever, because I'm fluent with it. And I said to Cluff, I'm like, do you think they're going to make you do that stuff? And then him and I had a really good conversation about, like, I don't know about the rest of you. I'm tired of taking an AQ course where it's just there because it's like, well, that's what people are doing these days, so you should kind of have a familiarity. And in my experience, I'm with these amazing, innovative, problem-solving, creative thinking type people, and they're like, I don't want to do Twitter. Like, why do I have to do Twitter so that somebody can check it off and say, okay, this person did all their digital activities? They're like, I don't want to do it. And then I'd be like, this is the part that I was telling you about earlier. At dinner time, I'm like, I'm sitting beside you, and I want to talk to you and find out what is your issue with it. Like, let's talk. I want to talk, because to me, it can be a very valuable tool, and it's done so much for my learning and my growth and my development. It's even humbled me in a lot of ways. It's done a lot of good things. So what is it about it that scares you? Are you frightened? Why are you disinterested? And then we get into it. And I've been able to convert some people, and some people, I'm like, that's great. You do you, I'll do me. You're not on the fence. You truly don't want to go digital. I get it. But if you're moving into admin in 2016, 2017, I'm like, you can't not just leave this stuff alone. It's going to be in your office. You're going to be dealing with it with the kids. You're going to be dealing with parents who are like, why are you sending me a piece of paper every month as a newsletter? I want you to send it directly to my phone or my email or whatever. Or you blog it and I'll come to you. Like, I was telling them, these are the things you're going to be dealing with, because as a parent, I don't want the paper. I want to be able to see what's happening in my kid's school using my mobile device in the middle of the day, because this is the world I'm living in. So even if you don't want to go there, you're probably going to get pushed into it somehow, some way. Let's say a supervisory officer is like, this is the way, you need to start moving in that direction. Well, now my SO is telling me to move in that direction. It's like, there should be a fluency. Do we force it upon people? I don't like that. But how do you get people into it without having them to do all these assignments that are never going to get them moving in that direction?
Yeah, and I want to go back first to something Jen said, and then I want to come back to what Rolland said. So I know, Jen, you were talking about that there is a shortage maybe of administrators. I know that there were several in our class that were in an acting position and had to complete PQP2 in order to continue that position in the fall. So I think for them, it was perhaps ticking some boxes. Like, it had to get done. It had to get done before August 15th, so that it would show up on their papers with the College of Teachers by September 1st. And then going back to maybe kind of both of what you were saying is, I found that sometimes what bothered me was some of the assignments were about spitting back answers. Like, read this. These are the answers I want. I just want you to spit back what you've just read. I don't want you to respond in a way that shows you reflected on what you just read. I want you to respond in a way that gives me what you just read in a shorter form. And I found that those assignments were the ones I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, this is not even something we often ask kids to do, to just spit it back. Like, I'm here because I want to chat with other people. I want to talk to other people. I want to see what the issues are. I don't want to have to memorize the five, because that's what we have computers for. I can memorize. I can look up a law. I can look up the Education Act. I can look up whatever the policy is in my board. I get that. The assignments that I want to be doing are the ones where I'm working with the other people in the course, where we are working together on stuff, where we are conversing, where we are arguing, where we are getting to the deep answers that we're looking for.
And can I jump in? Yeah,
please do.
I think, and we're sort of in just thinking in the back channel here. I think back to my other AQs though, is part one. I never liked part one of anything. Like if I could have audited, and I'm not saying I'm so smart, I knew everything, but that it always felt like that to me. And I feel like that's part of the reason I said, I'm like, I didn't really like part one. I liked the people because we did get to do some of that reflection. And I think part one is like, here's all the, and I always think of it, we did Fullen's The Principal book, but like, that's all the managerial stuff. That's like the stuff that I didn't want. This is why I didn't want to be a principal, was all the stuff you learned in part one. Like all my bias of you're a landlord of a building, right? Like none of the educational leadership part that requires that sort of reflective piece. So I'm thinking like to Chris's point, and Ramona, you having done it just online, is I feel like the content in part two lends itself more to needing that reflection, and the ability to do that in a short time with people you don't know is differently hard. The benefits that you get from having a larger community than your own board, because I see both things. If I didn't have a system role and haven't been able to do provincial things and have my own PLN, I would have been totally, I mean, I get that point, but to Roland's point too, the ability to like take time and reflect and not just have your people on your dial a phone a friend, but I mean, because I was applying in our board, it was good to have connections in our board. So I guess, I don't know, Chris, like for you, and this might be the reality right now. So how do you get the best out of it? I think in part two, and I don't know you super well, but how your brain works, I think topic wise, you'll like it better. And I would suggest that you being who you are is sort of help push that facilitator to richer things. And I think one can do that as if someone is the leader, the teacher, students can say, what about this? And if that leader is sort of receptive, even if you don't have the relationship with them that Rolland did with the principal that he did, or that I did with mine, is that someone will say, hey, that's a great idea, take that and go with it. If they say, nope, the rule book says we have to do it this way, and you have to do it this way, I don't roll that way. I'm like, too bad I'm doing it this way. But I guess you still don't have, and then do you start a sidebar? Because Chris, you said this too, how do we continue this? Rolland could continue that because he can go sit beside the person when they go to Timmy's or have a lunch break and say, hey, I'm a curious guy. Do you want to know more about Twitter? Here's why I think it's good. That's differently natural and organic. That's like the recess. And so it's hard to build the recess unless you have a staff room or a social. And that's not built into the pedagogy in online learning generally, and definitely probably not in OPC, or like who are not used to it and haven't done it yet. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Ramona, do you want to flip back? You had a part one, part two to what you were going to.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's all good. Because I definitely got a soft pivot, but.
Yeah, now I'm trying to remember where I was going with that.
You said you wanted to make a comment about something I said.
Yes. It's gone. Maybe it'll come back. It's okay. That's okay.
So here's my soft pivot. As I sat in the course, and as I was sort of engaging in activities that I feel like the activities in themselves, well, okay, I know the content of the course. Yes, there were elements that were definitely dated. The content of the course, and this was part of my feedback to OPC, I said, you're going to want to consider differentiating and getting a little bit of diversity in some of these videos that we have to watch. The people that are coming to talk to us, definitely you want to make sure that you're kind of repping a little broader palette of individuals that are speaking to us here, because it was really white. It was really white. I would say still predominantly male, identify as male. So that was some of my feedback saying, I think you could do better here. The backbone of the course, my brain kind of thought, well, if this is the course that's being offered to us kind of purely digitally, my assumption is this is also partially the hybrid course as well. Like I wondered how different in touch points the digital course would have been from an in real life course. The thing that I kept on kind of coming back to as I was sitting there, as I'm doing the assignments, there were moments where I thought, like, you know, one of the first tasks was to do a Twitter-esque Twitter as literacy as a writing form. I don't think is a valuable task in developing your digital leadership pedagogy. Like I really don't. I will say flat out that when I first came on Twitter, I was the guy that was so willing to share a slide deck or do a presentation about how amazing Twitter is. I'm not that guy anymore. I'm the guy now that recognizes that having a social media presence and understanding the fluency is important. I think understanding that a digital portfolio is important, and Twitter could be your digital portfolio, but I'm not the guy anymore that thinks that that's the one tool to rule them all. But when you drop that into a course as one of the assignments, you sort of focus importance on it, and you do indicate to the learners there that you need to have a mastery of this in some measure. And there were a lot of the students in the class that said, you know, you're looking at so you start to interact on Twitter, and they have 2 followers and they started their account back in 2008. So the expectation that you jump in and start using it as a task in a course, I don't know. Are you going to get to a space where you think that there's value in the big picture? There were moments where we, you know, make a Wordle or a word cloud. And I thought to myself, okay, we can do that. But I thought, I wondered, is there better, different collaborative kind of ways to offer a buffet of digital tools? And I had a couple moments there where I was trying to sort of step away from, okay, Cluff, you've done a lot of kind of like learning digitally, using digital tools and philosophizing about the use of learning digitally. Like it's just my headspace. But even I thought that there was a huge element of you're going to freak people. Like there was individuals in the course. It was such a weird kind of, I don't know if I'd call it a paradox. It was ironic. A huge number of individuals in the course that were using digital tools, but they weren't in a space where they were sort of networked digital tools. It was very much a do this, hand it back to me. So it was the equivalent of a digital handout in a lot of ways. We weren't talking about what it meant to collaborate and network within digital spaces. Yet we were doing it. So I felt like there was a meta side of this that we didn't really get to. Chids, what are you thinking? I saw you.
I don't want to take away from the leadership component of what we're talking about, but what I want to do is I want to spit at you this notion of they get you to do this activity. They think that it's beneficial, but it's not beneficial like in and of itself. You have to put the work in. So, for example, I've had leaders in my system say to me, wow, what you do on Twitter and with Twitter is amazing. I want to do the same thing. And I'm like, great, start now and then talk to me in 3 years, because I've been on it for many years. And only now can I feel the power of those connections, whether they're like deep connections or just surface connections, whatever. I can tweet a question about something, or I can share something, whatever, and I get some traction. That has taken years of operating in a certain way that's got me to where I am today. Just like if I said to an old school principal, you know, I want to be well respected just like you. Well, they're going to be like, dude, you got to work in schools. You got to work with people. You got to get messy. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be situations that are going to hit you over the head. And how you deal with those situations and how you deal with those relationships is what's going to lead people to say, hey, I really respect that guy. I want to work with him. And it's the same thing with the digital, but they treat it as a one-off. So I got a ton of friends that look at me and they still think to this day that all my Twitter stuff is smoke and mirrors. I'm like, it's not smoke and mirrors. And they're like, it's smoke and mirrors. And I just do one of these. I'm like, okay, do you want to see my leadership portfolio? They're like, yeah, go to this blog site. Do you want to know about my connections around podcasting? Yeah, go here. It's like every time you ask me for a resource, I direct you to my digital world because I'm done with the paper stuff as much as I can be. And I'm like, so how can it be smoke and mirrors? They're like, it's smoke and mirrors. I'm like, okay, you're saying that because it takes work. The paper stuff takes work too. I'm just not willing to put my time there anymore. So I had to say it because people are like, well, how do you do it? And I'm like, well, there is really, the only formula is to get into it, get dirty with it, use it, show people that there's value there. If there's no value, if you've got a Twitter account with 10 followers and you've had it since 2012, and now you're digging it out because you're in PQP part 1 or 2, well, it's not going to do anything for you. And the funny thing is, Cluff, and I talked to you about this, is that you know when an AQ starts because all of a sudden you see all these tweets come out from all these people who haven't tweeted forever. And there's like, what are your top 5 digital tools? Hashtag, know.
Call it the PQP Twitter storm.
And it's like, I jump in and I try to answer questions and I try to engage. And it's like yelling into a desert. Nobody's there anymore. They're all gone. It's like, how do you do it, Rolland? Well, I'm standing in the desert and I'm screaming, and eventually someone's going to walk past and be like, "Hey, what's going on?" And
dude, it's because we handed in our assignment. Right? You've been given the task. Yeah, you were asked to do an assignment where you have to pick from, one of ours was pick from a list of, I forget it was, some theorist, take a huge page and reduce it down to a tweet. So just to, and I jumped on this. So I did it as a thread. So it was like 3 hits on Maslow. And I was asked to knock it down to 1 tweet. Now, I would just say my frame was correct. Did I follow the rules exactly? No. Did I use the tools and the fluency of Twitter? Yes. Is it a way that people use Twitter that is, let's say, 2.0? I think so. There are some individuals that still don't use threading, right? You got more to say or you're looking to break up the conversation, you thread it. But it was interesting to me that I got knocked back to say, you got to knock this down to, under the character count.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah.
Because that's just, and I'm trying to, again, understand where the person's coming from. But to me, that reads as a tick box of the point of Twitter is saying things in less words. That is the text type. When I taught Twitter, so I feel like the why is missing in that. And I feel like to everybody's point in terms of the digital piece, respectfully, I'm wondering, and again, I gave the feedback I gave was critical in that it was criterion based to OPC, saying if, that I feel like the people who are writing the syllabus for OPC are not digital leaders because they're not the same people. They won't have to where they are in the level of OPC, like university professors, many, not that there aren't any, but like that's not their wheelhouse. So, and it's not something that they've got consultative information from current people on, because to me that's rigid in it's making a rubric based on a task criterion that's like based on a text type of what Twitter is, not the intention of Twitter. And I think to our point, I'd like to is that where we've lived, like, so 10 years in Twitter, whatever. I remember presenting on Twitter at my learning fair, probably 8 years ago now. And it wasn't about using Twitter, but I was saying like why teachers are scared of it and how you might use social media relationally still at that point. But I said, if you think of it's drinking from a fire hose, and to me, it's not about getting all the information even. It's about building, like I ask more questions than I post links to things, but before it was more links to things. Like I'm using it as a critical thinking and relational tool for my PLN, not in a transactional. I'm not trying to sell something, which again, like I'm not trying to do a course where I ask 5 things and then get the answer, and that's a little engagement. Some people, when they enter, that's what they're using it for a different purpose. And I know for many of us folks, because we've been involved in some of those conversations, if we're trying to use it for deeper, richer ways, to roll into your point, like whether that's smoke and mirrors, is that their own personal discomfort, where are they on their vulnerability scare? It's not scare, but that was an interesting slip of the tongue. But like, where are they in terms of that piece? Because that's not what they told me in my course Twitter was for. Because they're still telling you Twitter is for getting information, and you better only use 120 characters. And maybe that's the critical, but
to your point about people putting together a curriculum where they don't necessarily know exactly what they're dealing with when they enter into the curriculum, it speaks to me in terms of finding people who understand and have a fluency with a particular area, and having them take that and then bring it into a curriculum and be able to talk about it. When this pandemic started, I was communicating with a few principals in my system that were asking me questions about digital tools. And right away, I was like honored to be talking to them, because instead of them pretending that they knew what they were doing, they sought someone like me out. So they're like, hey, I know this principal, Rolland works for him. I'm going to see if I can connect because I got questions and I know he does this stuff. And it was awesome for two reasons. Number one, as someone who's interested in leadership, I got to flex my cognitive muscles and enter into their world. So like, hey, this is my problem. I'm a school leader. I want to direct my staff. I want to support my staff. I'm not sure. I'm talking to you because I know you use this stuff as a classroom teacher. And I'm like, whoa, you want to hear from me as a classroom teacher? I want to hear from you as a school leader, because these two worlds are going to collide. And for me, it's awesome for me to put myself in the position of talking to you about this tool and how it can be used at the administrator level. So for me, that's like I'm leveling up, right? And for him or her, they're leveling up because they're like, I'm going to understand how my staff can do this. Rolland is one example. But if Rolland can do it like this, then it could possibly be done by other people. They can mimic it, or they can just hear about it and then go on their own way. I think there's so much to be said about that. Find the people who understand what it is you're going to talk about, and then have them incorporate something in and be available to discuss it or to debrief it. Because I think first and foremost, principals are there to support people. They don't have, I've been told this by many principals, I don't have all the answers. But what I will do is I'll find the people with the answers and I'll roll them in so that we can figure out what's going on. And then by default, they get to learn a bunch of stuff because they keep finding people to come in and support. I don't understand why they can't do that with a curriculum. Have a framework, bring people in to plug into that framework, and make them available to speak to it, so that every part of that curriculum is authentic and has more of a purpose than just the checkbox. Some people just want the checkbox. That's fine. That's fair. But to someone like me, I would love it if different people came in and talked about different things. I was lucky. PQP Part 2, my instructor, a veteran principal in the system, has been teaching the course forever. Like, he's seen iterations of it. So he's a knowledgeable person and he's a supportive person. But for anybody else, like in PQP Part 1, which stunk compared to PQP Part 2, it was the same. It was the instructor talking about all this kind of dry stuff, and it would have been nice to get it injected with someone who really gets that particular area and is passionate about it and can like release that energy over to us. So I don't know if anybody's listening, but it'd be pretty awesome if a PQP course, particularly Part 2, that curriculum was injected with, like, if somebody said to me, hey, sit down with me and talk to me about this social media stuff. And what would you do? Here are the requirements. They have to be able to understand this. What would you do with it? I'm like, that's a problem I want to solve, right? Instead of all the other problems I'm dealing with that I have no interest in. That's a problem I want to work on. So the passion's going to come, the energy's going to come, and hopefully I can pass that on to other people.
I'm wait. Anyone else want to jump in? No, because as you're saying it, I'm thinking, okay, let's break outside of the box again too. Is that what is the point of PQP? Because I could say, okay, I'm the OPC. Rolland, you want to show me what you've learned, so do an independent study, right? You do that, so you're 4 people on this podcast right now. You're going to, PQP Part 2 requires you to show learning in this, and this area. So you create your course, you do your course, We get somebody to assess it and give you feedback, ideally ongoing, and then you get your paper, and now you can be a principal. So my wondering around that is how, like, let's separate the two things. How much is, and this is why it's different in board, because a lot of what, like, when I came into PQP Part 1, I'd been in a system role for 5 years, as had many of the people that I was working with. And so what I have benefited from that is I've worked with a lot of principals, and I've got to see the system in the province, which I know is, so having a different leadership position, I guess, in a board, gave, like, but for somebody who was coming out of the classroom who was in that, they were learning a lot of stuff about our board that I already knew because I'd worked at a system level. So that was the whole point of it. And then, not a whole point, but they got more than the not really interesting syllabus, in my opinion, because they got to see, I got out of their classroom context and got to see, like, system stuff you need to know. And like, oh, do I like this? Am I curious about this? And then in Part 2, it got to be more about the leadership. But how much are those connections about who you get to know? And I even think, I mean, I because of a system role, have been well connected. But when I did my go and shadow VPs, I picked 2 people from my course that I only knew from my course, not from my system role, because of, again, those lunchtime chats that we had, and they had gone into VP, and they were from my course, and they were now VPs. That's why I wanted to shadow, because they had the same learning experience that I did. Anyway, yeah, so I'm just seeing, I guess that's my wondering. And then it is that what is the point of the PQP?
So one of the things I will say, and so there were a lot of the elements that I did enjoy the PQP one. I really did feel like the way that our conversations flowed in it, that the reminder that I had to consider my teacher brain, but push into a space of leadership made me question a lot about who I am as a leader and what do I still need to learn about myself as a leader. Because there really was this kind of brain shift in thinking about the development, let's say, of an IEP, which could be offered in any AQ, like the access to sort of understanding and reading and looking at IEP, and then sort of understanding all these sort of interactions with an IEP that happen at system level and kind of above the classroom level, just as an example. So I really appreciated that. And I will kudos to our instructor and kudos to my colleagues in the course. Everyone was pushing so hard to not just get mired down in the classroom experience and talk about it, because we started there in the beginning that we were answering questions, like the content of the PQP allowed you to kind of start your answer from the position of being a classroom teacher or a classroom educator, and then launch from there. Some of the cool challenge was, how do I kind of answer this from kind of outside my wheelhouse, but given some of the tools that we were given? So I did appreciate that. Jen, to your point about the purpose of the PQP, I don't have a specific answer to this, but I'll give you one of my experiences in this. So when I sat down, I had a previous AQ that I took that maybe it was my junior. It was either my junior or my guidance specialist. It was one of the two. And as I sat there in front of my computer, it was both of them were entirely online. I thought to myself, you know what? All this typing, like I'm done with this typing. My forte is talking it out. And if I can't talk it out with someone, then I'm going to do vlogs. So in the I think it was my guidance specialist, a lot of the formative work, like, okay, there were moments where I hit a wall, much like that. You can't really do Twitter unless you're doing Twitter. There were some assignments where I was kind of locked down, like, okay, fine, I'm going to type out my answer. I have to give a chart. Okay, I'm going to type but anything else where it was I could connect my research with my thinking, with my kind of like big thinking. I'm just going to do a video. So I did a series of videos that I hung on my personal YouTube page, and then I shared the link with the class and just dropped that video into the space. It wasn't received well. I will tell you, quite a few individuals said, this is really difficult to process. We wish that you would just write it out. To which I just showed them where the, like you could read, you can read the transcript. And I'm like, you're welcome to copy and paste that. It even has time, stamps on it for you if you need it. So I did that if the people that wanted to, I was being cheeky. I'll admit I was being cheeky. So when I took the PQP1, I was like, I got this great idea. And I spoke to my spouse about it. I said, you know what? I'm going to post up like all my answers on my webpage. So my personal layer, and I'm going to put my answers there, and I'm going to allow other people to kind of read it as a blog. And her response was, well, isn't that kind of like giving away the answers? And I paused for a moment and I thought, and I fell in this, I'm like, yeah, I guess it is giving away the answers. And I honestly did feel that. I'm like, yeah, okay. So what I ended up doing is that each unit, each module had a reflection opportunity. So those are all the videos that are on there. I think there's 5 or 6 that I put on my blog. But I had that moment of kind of like what you're addressing there. Like, what is the purpose? Like, if the question and content of the PQP is so easily, if you can so easily gather success by looking at other people's content and handing that in per se, is the PQP one designed in the right way? And I love your perspective on it, saying, you know, what if the PQP was opened up with just that question, is demonstrate your understanding, your learning, your process under this topic, without the specific frame. So you're basically, you know, developing a portfolio of learning. This is where it leads me. We sort of lead up to the practicum, because I was asking very similar questions about the practicum. So if I may, just a nod from the group, can I transition to practicum? So this is my thing with the practicum. I came through the course with a very specific thing that I wanted to achieve with the practicum. I handed in a proposal for a practicum that I could still do. I handed in an assignment, and it sort of started in the beginning and kind of ended up being one of the culminating things. So anyone listening, the practicum is an inquiry of action. You have a deep, unsettled question that you want to pursue. So you develop a project, I guess I'll just call it a project. You develop a project that you're going to work with a fellow an administrator that can kind of be your mentor. You run a project in your school. You have tons of feedback loops. You can do any sort of COPS model, student-centered, you know, equity-minded. You gather your data from it. You hand it back in. You're done your practicum. So in thinking about what that practicum could be, I've decided something, and I wonder about something. So I've decided that I'm not going to do my practicum. Not for a while anyways. I'm going to wait and see and grow. I'm going to sort of get into my space and figure out, you know, what would be the best use of me? What would be the best use of me while I'm trying to run a practicum within a school? So it's not about completing the assignment necessarily. I'll take as long as I can, maybe longer. I don't know, but I'm not jumping into the practicum right away. I have it planned. I could do that one, or I could just see what's needed in the school. The second thing that it made me wonder about, though, I started to question the placement of the practicum and its purpose. And it strikes me that it would be more purposeful after PQP2. So once you've sort of gathered your learning and you have a greater kind of, let's say, command of what the expectations, maybe not the actual job, but at least the expectations of a leader, according to one lens, according to OPC, where I took my course, the practicum might be better placed, or something like a practicum might be better placed once you're completed, as opposed to putting it between the two. So you folks can jump on the practicum wagon wherever you would like to land, but that was my thought fuel.
I wonder if the practicum couldn't be part 2. Why isn't, if the practicum is probably supposed to be the activity that is most individually based, that most shows your leadership skills, that prepares you best for the job. Why is it just you and the administrator you're working with, and it's sent to OPC and then it's done? Why is it not more? Why can't it be part 2?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I wasn't expecting you to say that. So my head was going in one way, and then you say that, and I'm like, pause. So I can't address your question, Ramona, at the moment because it's such a good one. But what you said about the practicum being like relevant and preparing you, if that's really what it's for, then the practicum should not be what it is at the moment. Like for me, my practicum was running the school's climate committee. That's what I did. I ran a school climate committee, and I helped like keep them on track. I helped organize meetings and action items, and then helped organize the action items, then debriefed, and then looked at data around, is what we're doing helping with the school climate here at our school. It didn't prepare me to become a principal. It gave me like a super boost of a teacher running something that anybody could have done, that I kind of owned for that school year. But if you're asking that question about, or if you're suggesting that a practicum should be more useful, more authentic, even if it were part 2, then I would think you'd have to get into like the nitty gritty of what it is like to run a school. Because what I did was just one piece. It was a leadership piece, but if I'm a principal, I'm not going to be running the school climate committee. I suspect one of the teachers in the building is going to take it on because they have a passion for it or have an interest around it. What I did was what all teachers do. But what I'm now thinking I would have done was wrap my brain around special education in the building, or even the budget, because I have no clue how any of that's. Spec Ed, I have an idea, but I'm weak. And so then I would have said to my principal, I got to work with you or on Spec Ed. Like, I don't even know what you do with it. That would have been much more beneficial than running a school climate committee. 100%. If I operated the way that you're suggesting that it's used for. And then the second part about you suggesting, well, why can't your practicum be your part 2? I think they'd have to shift the curriculum, right? Part 1 would have to be all the info pieces we are given or are told to reflect on and regurgitate in part 1, if part 2 is to be a practicum. But if part 2 were to be the practicum, it would be my suggestion that it's going to be heavy and deep, because like every time I talk to someone who's done a practicum, to be honest with you, I'm never blown away by their practicum. I'm like,
blow you away now?
Can I what?
Can I blow you away now?
Blow me away.
Well, because I love it. But again, I have to, it's context, but I'm also trying to talk about privilege. So being privileged to be in a program position while doing a practicum is different than being in a classroom context in which to do it, for both time and access. So I think I'm wondering about that piece. And again, I didn't want to just take over, but I guess I'm sad what it sounds like the practicum experience could be. So I'm also trying to, what could it be for classes in a like. So maybe it's changed since I did it too, but the only rule that we have is you have to say what it is in part 1. You're not supposed to change it. You can do it whenever you want for up to 5 years or whatever, but as long as you hand it into the same person you had in part 1 was true, and that you can't apply to the pool, like you have to, you're not actually finished until you finish your practicum. Is that still true? So I guess I started mine when I decided I was going to do part 2, because otherwise I also didn't want to do it after part 1 and then leave it for a really long time, if I wasn't going to do part 2 for a long time. So I think I started it after part 2, and I maybe it's not that mind-blowing. I loved it because I had the ability to run a collaborative inquiry in a school. So the principal, who was my mentor, I was like trying to build teacher capacity, knowing that they were my peers. I was very open with them, saying, this is my prac. You don't want to do this, we're not going to use this is trying to align with what your school is doing. And I happen to know this because I have a program role. I didn't work in the school in the building with the teachers. So I was in a coaching role anyway, but again, a fellow union peer, as folks would be who were doing it then. And it was really rich learning for me. And I continued to, and so again, what's the point of the prac? That learning helped me in my job for the next 3 years before I even applied to the pool. Because I made it a rich task. So like, again, Chids, to yours, like if it's you could be on the direction, like you can do all these things and not be doing a prac, but how do you have it? So if the prac is to be rich to you, so to maybe it's not that part 2 is the prac, maybe that is it. Maybe it's instead of paying your $1,000 or whatever to the OPC, you say, can I use that to get this many release days? for me to go in somewhere else and do it, right? And that someone in my SO or somebody in my board could sign off on that piece. So Ramona, I like what you're saying too, because, and if you think back to Teachers College model, even before Ontario moved to 2 years, is that that's where you do all your learning. So whether that's part of that's budget, like again, and again, I think my biggest gaps moving into thing are going to be things. I'm going to be managerial and administrivia. I'm not going to be in a building, so it's going to be very different for me in a remote school. Anyway, my P already said to me this: you're going to learn a lot this year, but if you go to a brick and mortar building, like there's going to be a lot you didn't learn in your first year. I'm like, I'm good for 2 rookie years, whatever. I'm excited for this game. Anyway, I guess it goes back to what's the point of the practicum. And if it is just a tick box, then you can make it about whatever you want it to be and be done. If you wanted to make it a rich learning, then and Cluff, you've already realized this, then you take the time, you make it about the learning. But if it's playing a game to get to the next step and you're doing your learning somewhere else, that's also the way the system is designed. So
sorry, I'm going to jump in just for a second. I feel like it should be more like the TLLP process, right? That there is so much more rich experiences for you. There's so many things that you are investigating that you need to know more about, that you want to know more about. It's not, I mean, I enjoyed doing my prac, but it was it did feel like a one and done. And it wasn't something that I was weak in. It was something I had some knowledge in and grew a little bit, but it could have been a lot more.
Yeah. And is it okay if I talk about the back channel, guys? Okay, because I feel I have to my position of privilege. I mean, I earned my way into a system role. I chose a system role, and I'm thinking back to, I was listening to your first 2 podcasts, and I didn't finish all of part 2 yet, but I was listening to today. Is that it's the other and the dark side, right? And curriculum is that also in some ways, and so it's different because when principals left the union and then they're the boss, that's part of that. Like that, if you move there. That whole fear or judgment or all of those pieces there exist. I think in the consultative role, like I see myself as a co-learner, as a coach, and so I think also because I don't want people to judge. Oh, you get to do this cushy job. You don't teach kids anymore. I was not somebody who was in love with program. There's people that I worked with who I love, who applied many times, wanted to do it. I was just like. It was Brenda Sherry's tech coach job, and that was cool. And she'd done like digital movie making for kids. I'm like, I don't even know what the job was. I'm like, that sounds cool. You're moving into. She was moving into admin. I'm like, I want that. I'm going to apply for that job. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But what I learned from it, and that helped me in my pathway, in my journey to where I am now, is that I love working with adults. The kids are easy. Working with peers in a collaborative way, and that's been my richest learning. And so also if the board's investing in me with any learning, then I have a duty to share that out to empower others in the best way that I can. And so you're right though, to all these points, do I have more access? Like I know people in the system now. So if I do a good job, then that's known. I mean, I guess like applying in your own board versus applying out of board. Also, if you are known to not be strong in a system role, you also probably aren't going into it then. And that's so the pros and cons of that. And again, not all boards, we've lost a bunch of consultant roles too. Like the government, like the access to these roles is also shrinking. And so I'm very thankful for the experience that I've had. Anyway, seeing everything. Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
I want to nudge this a little bit. There, as I'm sitting in the PQ, I keep saying that, but I was just like 3 weeks ago. It was the first week of August when everything was handed in. So, and I'm thinking about I edited, re-edited, redacted, adjusted, handed in several drafts of what my practicum could be. Hit send on or share, I forget what it was. Hit send on the day that the actual digital learning space that we were working in was shutting down. We would no longer have access to it. My instructor said you can send it to me directly because everyone had drafts in. But I got it into there and got it done. And then I started to think about this because everyone got a chance. We got to see each other's. We were all kind of talking about our different proposals. And of course, as we're talking to each other, there was a whole lot of experience sharing. And there were individuals there that like they're deep. They've done system. They've already done 1 year of interim administrator. You know, they've shown their leadership chops. They've been on committees. They've done the TLLP stuff. Like they've got all this stuff already. And taking PQP1 is just kind of like it. In some ways, it's a tick box, but they do have the experience. I mean, it's necessary prerequisite to sort of moving into the space. So I was thinking that I'm saying, like, why do these individuals have to do a practicum? And I started thinking about the PLAR process that, boards have, where you can go in and you can go in front of a panel. I'm imagining now, I've never been there, where you can sort of say, I have all this experience in this space. Can I just have the credit? I know for myself, coming into teaching, I was accredited work experience, which moved me along the experience check posts when I came into teaching. So I had my degree, but I also had experience. It was acknowledged. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, can lived experience and demonstrated leadership projects up to this point slot in, and they say, you don't need to do the practicum. Do PQP2 and you're good.
Well, could this podcast be your practicum? Like,
of course it can.
Yeah.
And I'm going to propose that. But, right, like, I know we can laugh about it. But again, purposeful design for the practicum. If this is the first time that you dipped your foot into leadership, then you're going to be really thankful that you got the chance to develop a practicum. But any of you at this table right now have experiences that show equal weight in leadership to the practicum. And I mentioned in our back channel site, that the sidebar, whatever, talking about the legacy might be the way to kind of unpack that a little bit. So whether you do a new practicum or you look at your already lived experience in leadership, what's been the legacy of that? Have these projects lived on? Have they shown growth? Was it a seed, right, that actually started something up, and now you can actually see in the board where these things are still going on and on? Is it part of a broader portfolio of leadership experiences that you've just been cracking off on for the last 7 years? So yeah, I started thinking about the PLAR process, the purpose of the practicum, and whether or not, if you already have leadership experiences, why couldn't that stand in? Why do you have to do one more assignment to prove that you're paying attention in the course?
And I'm going to guess it's an accreditation from OPC, like OCT has certain standards. Because I guess, and then, I mean, I know this is about the prac, and I know we're over time already, but I guess then the next piece is, like at my interview, I didn't talk about my 2 interviews, and in my package that I had to put together. I loved my prac. I referenced it because I loved it. It was by far the least talked about thing in any of those contexts. So that's the other part too. Not because because 3 years since then, that's not, in terms of how I wanted to frame my answers and looking at and the way the questions were, is looking at sort of the BIPSA and saying, okay, here who I am, what I bring, I hope, and this is what why I want to be a leader, is that I'm connected in multiple different ways. I like going on tangents and connecting with people and seeing things in different things. So here's my equity pillar, and here's where I've shown leadership in this. Here's my 21st century competencies, problem solving, collaborative work. And here's some leadership that relates to this question. So I guess like school versus real life, right? Is that in the prac? So there's the course 1, course 2, where the prac is, and like what Ramona said, like it should be about your learning. And maybe the frustration too is that the PQP1, there wasn't really rich learning that I couldn't have Googled or read the Education Act on my own. Because it was online, we didn't go to the rich conversations that my brain needs for my learning in part 1. That's I guess the good part is that's been true for me in every single AQ. Again, maybe I wished I audited those, but maybe it's going through that process, clunky process. Okay, I want to start in part 2, and then I want to do the specialist. And the specialist was always my favorite, because that's when you got into the big thinking. And of what I know of the folks in this, if you're a big thinker, you want to get to, when can we do the big thinking, please? And so make it big thinking from the beginning as best you can. And then after the course part is done, make it big thinking that's going to continue for you, not for the instructor, not for the tick box. Don't stop me from big thinking. Well, exactly. And that's, I mean, the good part in where the world is now is that disruptive people talking about that is differently. I feel like we're not just looking, I mean, the world is more open to diverse and not just compliant thinkers. And Chris, when I had a sidebar, is that I didn't always want to be a principal. And I think when people say, I always wanted to be a principal since I was young, I'm like, oh, the principal to me when I was young was like the person who gave people the strap or sat in their office and maybe talked at assemblies. Like that was my kid perspective. But I'm curious for people that aspired to that, because that seemed not fun or interesting at all to me. Anyway.
So for anyone listening to us right now, just to give you, you can see our kind of cheat sheet. There's been several times where we're kind of saying, okay, here's our time check. Here's our time check. Now I'll say for me, coming to the podcast world, it's almost as if like there's a lot of tropes out there. Like somehow the conversation should be only an hour long. Sorry, folks. And maybe the conversation should be shaped out for you ahead of time with some, pointers or nuggets about what we're going to talk about. Sorry, folks. I think this conversation, the flow, like this is where you need to go with it, right? You need to just kind of capture the wind of it, and you're just going for a ride. So I appreciate the takes on the practicum. I question everything about my next step. And I'll just, Chids had kind of mentioned that I'm kind of grabbing thunder here, but I'm the youngin in the group as far as taking the courses, right? So I'm sitting in that space as far as, do I grab PQ? If I see there's a digital version of PQP2 coming up in September, should I grab it? Should I just go for it and get it done? Should I wait on it? The one thing I will say I know for sure is that I'm not going to be jumping into my practicum right away. I'm going to short it down to prac. I like that. I don't want to say all those syllables. I got to be honest. I'm going to wait to do my prac. Prac. I like the concussive nature of it. I'm going to wait to do my prac. I can't see myself in it yet, though I know I did the assignment. It's a funny. I know it represents me. It's a good imagining of what I want to do, but it doesn't feel real yet. And I think because I'm not anchored in the purpose of the school. So if I were to speak to any thinkers that are going to jump into PQP1, I think that's a good space to push back in your thinking. Consider the deeper implication of and the legacy of your PQP. Where else you want to go, folks? What time are we at? We're at like an hour 32. New record.
We're gonna start competing with Joe Rogan, doing like hours on end. I want to say something about the PQP. I was gonna say, can I say something? Of course, I can say something. Now that it's so interesting to take the time to reflect on any experience. When I think back to my PQP practicum, it just seemed like a make work project, and I had to get it done. And I have to tell you, I was not in a good space when I was doing it. I was not working with an administrator that I got along with. Every meeting with the administrator was like, I was nervous before every meeting. There was no flow. It was like, I got to go in, this is what I'm going to present. And it really sucked. And I've been talking lately about relationship that you have with your administrator when you do your practicum. Also, when you decide to apply to the VP pool or however your board does it, you need to have the support of your supervisor, your immediate supervisor. And knowing now, like talking to the three of you about this topic brings me right back to when I was doing it. And now I'm comparing how I felt then and how I feel now with my current administrators. And things now are much better, but I'm also a different person. And so the kind of conversation we're having here is kind of like what I would have with my two administrators and say to them at this point in my career, my practicum needs to go deep. So I know there's like, there's parameters, right, around like student achievement and staff development and stuff. And it's like, to me, that's all secondary in terms of I need to sink my teeth into something I really don't understand about this job that I need to understand. I need to gain some ground in a particular area of work that an administrator does. Because having listened to Ramona talk about it, and having listened to you, Jen, talk about the purpose of the PQP, and kind of sitting back and watching Cluff go through it and the way he's talking about it has me thinking about it in a completely different way. So that's what I wanted to say about that, the practicum. I think for some people, it's just they don't care about legacy, Cluff. They just want to get it done. And I remember when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking legacy. I wasn't thinking, let's just get it done. I was thinking, okay, I need to do something that's going to be long-term, like over the course of the school year. And I need to show and have artifacts of leadership throughout that process. But it's also because I had an administrator that I didn't trust, and that I don't believe the administrator trusted me either. So it was conflict at every turn. And it made for a very uncomfortable feeling, which is why it took me so long to get to part 2. And I remember sitting in part 2, and 95% of the people in part 2 had just done part 1 with this instructor. And he's talking about the practicum, and he kind of look at me every now and again. He's like, "You're done, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good. He's like, "Okay." And it was almost like, "Rolland, you can go grab a cookie and like a pop, because what I'm about to talk is going to bore you, because you're done. You've been done for 10 years. So go get something to eat or whatever." It was hilarious because I literally was like, I could turn my brain. I would literally read the book that we had to read. He'd start talking about the practicum, and I'd crack open the book and do my reading and highlighting. So it's like, for me, that's a whole other layer of, are you working with an administrator that you have a rapport with? Now, I know, I don't know what it's like in high school. I have no idea, Cluff, like, who do you just approach your principal, who is busy because they run a high school, thousands of kids, hundreds of staff. I'm just in the elementary school. Usually it's like 300 to 500 kids. And there's nobody else to talk to. They're the person. So number one, I'd like to know, Cluff, how do you move forward in a high school? And then Jen, I'd like to hear from you too. For your practicum in a system role, who was supervising you? Was it an SO? Did you have a principal responsible for your consultant position as a teacher? Like, I'd love to hear, because I'm assuming Ramona and we reported to our principal in an elementary school. But I'd like to hear about, Jen, your relationship with the person supervising your practicum, if you weren't in a school, maybe you were. And then Cluff, I'd like to hear what your next move is. Do you set up a time with your principal to talk to them and say, "Hey, I'm going to be doing PQP part 2 sometime. I've got a practicum idea and I got to get it done, and you got to kind of sign off on it"?
Sure. I'll go super quick on this one, only because I have had just another thought that rattled me. Anyone listening to this podcast right now, seriously consider talking to someone that has done the PQP, and your next dream of leadership task, get your hands on the criteria for the practicum. Okay, I'll say it. Get your hands on the criteria for the practicum. Even if you're not going to do the PQP, develop a program based on those criteria, so that when you're in your PQP1, you can say, "I just finished a practicum. Does it qualify?" I'm just putting that right out there, just to consider. Someone give it a try. But if you're going to play safe about it, get the criteria that practicum is based on. I'd be really curious to see whether or not, how that would be received. In the least, you've run a great project. You've deepened your leadership tools. You've benefited the school. But I'm just going back to that PLAR thing. And you say to your instructor, "Okay, I just finished this." And it actually is entirely based on what that practicum should look like. My administrator that I was working with on it was my mentor during it. And it has legacy, because now, as I'm taking PQP1, I'm actually moving into year 2 of the project. I would love to talk to someone that sort of gives that a try, just to see how that plays out. Imagine arriving in the PQP1, having already developed your practicum, and what you're actually reporting on is the second level of it. You deepening your practice, that would be fantastic. What I did, I reached out. I have individuals I have individuals that are friends, that are colleagues, that I've worked with, that are administrators. I knew them when they were teachers. I reached out to one and I said, will you be my mentor? I'm taking PQP1. I just put it flat out. I'm taking PQP1 right now. I would appreciate if I may come to you as a mentor to ask questions. And I told them flat out what it would entail. Anyone that's gone through the process knows that it's just like the Twitter storm, you know, from the format, what the individual's working on. This person said yes. And my hope is that even though I'm not shifting formally into the practicum right away, that I can remain connected with this administrator. I think ideally you want to have an administrator that's in the school that you're doing your practicum in, because that seemed to be what I was being told. Like, you should have someone that you have access to. There were people I was fortunate that I already had a relationship with this individual. So, I mean, we've gone out for coffee, we're connected. There were individuals in the course that were really kind of freaking out because they didn't know if they were going to get any face-to-face time. They hadn't spoken to anyone before March 13th happened. So they hadn't set in motion that possibility of PQP1. So they were kind of coming at it cold. I know I got to do a practicum. I'm not quite sure who I can approach for this. So they were kind of designing it, one, without a mentor in mind, and two, not really knowing what September would look like, whether or not there were some individuals that kind of designed something and it might not work if we're entirely in if it's all digitally online. So that's the spiel. Yeah, and you're right, secondary. So that's how it worked for me. I just texted the person.
Yeah, I'll speak quickly to mine, Rolland, just because you asked. So we do have a principal program who's our principal for our curriculum team. And most people who were on my team who did their prac had him as their supervisor. I actually asked his permission to not have him as my supervisor, not in a bad way to him, but because we were doing collaborative inquiry as part of our cycle of support in our board for the past 5 years in my role. And my role as a tech coach sometimes fell in, but I wasn't a curriculum leader. So I didn't lead collaborative inquiry in schools, I sort of supported it. One of the schools though, I was heavily involved with our school effectiveness lead at the time. And so I was always at these sort of collaborative inquiry startups. And this one school was doing something which aligned with a topic that I was passionate about, which was more than the technology, it was the 21st century competencies. So I'll even read you my clearly articulated statement of the collaborative inquiry problem of practice. The purpose of my inquiry is to explore how to build teacher confidence and competence around modeling critical and creative thinking processes in various contexts to help improve the ability of their students to do the same. So where this school is in terms of student achievement, is that they had done a lot of rich stuff and they were ready to take it there. That just happened. Like, this is totally my bag, I'm into this. And I was sitting at the table. So the principal, I didn't know super well. She was it was her only second year as a P. She was great though. I'd met her, I'd worked with some of her staff when she was a VP at another school. And I said, can I do this with my prac? So I had to get permission from my principal too, because my role was going to be slightly different. But again, that's the piece. It aligned well with my portfolio and my role. The curriculum leader, she was like great to tag into me because she'd done a year's worth of work. So for them, it was their second iteration. So to your point, Chris, that school was ready for this learning. But I also wanted another thing that I gave PQP feedback on, so maybe it's changed somewhat, is they kept saying it's a collaborative inquiry. And we did a lot of work with Jenny Donahue. Our board's whole model of support was based on collaborative inquiry. I'm like, this is not a collaborative, like, they would reference things in PQP saying, this is this. I'm like, no, it is not. I've talked to the author and you've completely misinterpreted their work. So don't call it something that it's not. And that was just a B in my head. So I wanted it to be truly collaborative, which is why I also had to say to the educators, like, this is your learning. Just because it's my prac, if you like, it's going to go where you need it to go. I'm not trying to anchor you into what I need to do, because otherwise it's not collaborative. But so I'm honest and upfront with you that I'm like, and I'm going to be doing reflective practice on this. It's for my learning as well. I will be transparent and share everything with you. And if you don't want to do it, I won't do it. Everyone bought in. It was a really great learning experience. But you could also tell by my topic that the culture in the building and those teachers were ready for that learning, which was totally, I was jazzed, because that wasn't true for me in a lot of other contexts. They weren't there yet. So that's why I was so engaged with it. And that's in terms of what the principal did. I mean, she came to some of the pieces, and I just asked her for feedback. So it wasn't but I didn't belong to that staff. I'm not from that school, which is also different. Because I think when you're a teacher in the school and trying to do collaborative leading and not just I don't mean not just but like not an initiative, it's differently hard to do that as in a total peer role, because not even because of the union, just because you're there with them, right? You're like, it's like, I was more like a coach of a team, and you would be like a captain of a sports team within the context. You're still playing in the sport with them. I was separate enough, as a principal is separate enough when that role shifts. Anyway. It is sleepy time. I mean, I could talk to you folks forever, obviously.
I just want to check that Rolland feels that he's got the answers he was looking for in there.
I do. Both. It's funny. Both Jen and Chris, though, your answers are just, they're not linear. And I appreciate that. And it's funny because me, having done this, I was looking for linear. Now I'm like, whatever, it's all good. It's okay for me to bounce now. But both of you, non-linear. Ramona, was yours linear, or were you kind of in the same boat as Jen and Chris, where you were like, mine was very linear. I picked it. Okay. That's cool. I just wanted to see. I appreciate it. Both of you did answer my question, gave me a flavor for who you were reporting to, what it kind of looked like. I love Jen. I pictured you as a quarterback, right? Like you're kind of, you see the players in front of you. They all know their role. You're tossing the ball at certain people to get something done, and they're doing it, and you're moving forward down the field. So that's kind of what I pictured. You look good in a Steelers uniform. That's all I have to say about that.
I'm a rugby player, which I think is even.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's very collaborative, big team sport. So yeah.
Right on.
All right, well, folks, we're at a minute 46.
Hour 46.
Oh, sorry, what did I say? A minute?
It's bedtime.
I told you it's been a long day. I really need to go to bed. Okay, so it's hour 46, people, almost an hour 47. But I really want to thank Jen for joining us this evening and sticking with us for the long haul and sharing her insights and provoking us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And as Cluff is the first person who ever invited me to a podcast, and here's his art of my tangents.
Oh, geez.
And many podcasts I've been on since, they've had to do a second one because I talked too long. So I might be part of the problem. So if you don't want to have me back because I went too long this time, but thanks for the work that all of you are doing. And I would love being part of this conversation. I'd love to come back sometime after I have new perspectives if you're interested.
Absolutely.
That's cool. I'd love to hear about, it would be great to have you back and have you talk about your role as an administrator around the remote learning. I would love to hear how that plays out. And it's kind of exciting to me because you don't seem like you have to play in a linear process. So that is really intriguing to me to hear, because I have a feeling this remote learning thing is going to be anything but linear. So it would be cool to hear from you later on about your work as an administrator with that portfolio that you're kind of leading.
For sure, yeah. And again, I'm an optimist, so I will be tired and had lots of epic failures, but I will also be always excited to talk to you about that, and I'm really excited for it and for the students and staff that are get to be part of it. So yeah, definitely.
Right on. Well, everybody have a good night.
Yeah, good night, everyone.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all. That was
Peace.
awesome.